The desert wind carried voices across the Nevada proving grounds like ghosts searching for somewhere to rest. Inside the subterranean command center, those voices were loud, confident, and wrong. Colonel Randall stood in the center of his kingdom, a man built like a doorframe, his chest decorated with the ribbons of a career spent in conventional theaters. He was gesturing at the holographic displays that surrounded him, each one showing a different aspect of the most advanced missile defense grid ever built. His officers stood at attention, listening to him describe the invincibility of their systems with the certainty of men who had never been proven wrong. They did not notice the woman who had arrived 3 hours earlier. She was small, perhaps 5'4", wearing plain gray coveralls with no insignia, no rank, no identification beyond a security badge that read, Consultant, Level 7. Her hair was pulled back in a severe knot. Her face was unremarkable in the way that allows a person to move through a crowd without being remembered. She carried a single duffel bag and a toolkit that looked older than most of the officers in the room. She had walked past the main command center without stopping, asking only one question to the corporal who met her at the security checkpoint. "Where's the auxiliary control station?" The corporal had looked confused. "Ma'am, that system was decommissioned 8 years ago. It's in sub-level 3. Nobody uses it anymore." She had nodded and walked away, leaving the corporal staring after her, uncertain whether he was supposed to stop her or report her or simply let her disappear into the belly of the facility like all the other ghosts that haunted military installations. In the command center, Colonel Randall was reaching the crescendo of his briefing. "Gentlemen, what we have built here represents the future of warfare. Quantum entanglement communication, AI-managed threat assessment, response times measured in microseconds. We are not just the tip of the spear, we are the entire arsenal." His officers nodded, a few smiled. They believed him because he believed it himself, and belief in the military tends to flow downhill like water seeking the lowest ground. Then the alarms started. They were not the sharp, urgent klaxons that signaled incoming threats. These were different. These were the confused, uncertain sounds of a system that had encountered something it could not categorize, something that existed outside its programmed understanding of reality. "Talk to me," Randall barked. A young lieutenant at the primary console was stabbing at his keyboard with increasing desperation. "Sir, the AI is detecting a friendly aircraft in restricted airspace, but the signature doesn't match anything in our database. Identify it." "It's one of ours, sir. A C-130 on a scheduled supply run, but the system is reading it as hostile. It's initiating countermeasures." The room went cold. A countermeasure, in the language of automated defense grids, was a polite word for murder. The quantum array was preparing to fire a hypersonic interceptor at an American aircraft carrying American personnel on an American mission. Randall moved to the console, his bulk casting a shadow over the lieutenant. "Override it." "I'm trying, sir. The AI won't accept manual input. It's locked into autonomous mode." "Then unlock it." "Sir, I don't have the authorization code. The system was designed to prevent enemy infiltration by restricting manual control during threat scenarios." Randall's face flushed red. Around the room, other officers were now scrambling, each one discovering the same terrible truth. The most advanced defense system in the world had become convinced that an ally was an enemy, and no one could persuade it otherwise. The countdown appeared on every screen, 90 seconds until launch. That was when the voice cut through the chaos. It was not loud. It did not need to be. It had the quality of a scalpel, precise and cold and utterly devoid of panic. "Step away from the console, Colonel." Every head in the room turned. She stood in the doorway, the woman in gray coveralls. She was not hurried, she was not afraid. She simply walked across the command center with the economy of motion one might see in a surgeon approaching an operating table. "Who the hell are you?" Randall demanded. She did not answer. She walked directly to an auxiliary panel that no one had touched in years, a dusty relic from the previous generation of systems that the quantum array had rendered obsolete. She opened her toolkit, which contained not keyboards or data tablets, but physical tools, screwdrivers, wire strippers, a handheld multimeter with an analog needle. "I asked you a question," Randall said, his voice rising. She pulled the panel cover off with a single practiced motion, exposing a maze of copper wiring and mechanical relays. Her hands moved with the speed and certainty of someone who had performed this exact task 1,000 times in 1,000 different configurations. 60 seconds. "Somebody stop her," Randall ordered, but nobody moved. They were paralyzed by the strangeness of the moment, by the cognitive dissonance of watching someone approach a crisis not with software, but with hardware, not with commands, but with copper wire. She was stripping insulation from 3 different cables simultaneously, her fingers working independently like a pianist performing a complex fugue. She twisted the exposed copper together, then connected it to a manual bypass circuit that should not have existed, that the quantum array's designers had declared redundant and obsolete. 30 seconds. The lieutenant at the main console was watching his screen with the expression of someone witnessing a miracle or a horror, unable to distinguish between the two. "The targeting solution is degrading," he whispered. "The AI is trying to recalculate, but it's receiving conflicting data from somewhere." The woman soldered the final connection. The smell of hot metal and burning flux filled the air. She flipped a mechanical switch, the kind that produced a satisfying physical click, the kind that had no software interface and could not be hacked or confused or overridden by any AI. The countdown stopped at 11 seconds. Every screen in the room flickered, then stabilized. The targeting solution disappeared. The hypersonic interceptor powered down, its warhead still safe in its silo, its intended target still flying peacefully through the Nevada sky. The crew inside unaware of how close they had come to being erased from existence. The command center was silent. The woman was already packing her tools, her movements methodical and unhurried. She closed the panel, secured the cover, and shouldered her duffel bag. Colonel Randall found his voice. It was smaller than before. "You just accessed a secure defense grid without authorization. You bypassed fail-safes that are classified at the highest levels. You could have compromised the entire system." She turned to look at him. Her eyes were the color of a winter sea, flat and analytical and utterly devoid of judgment. She was not angry. She was simply observing him the way one might observe a failed experiment. "I saved 200 lives," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost conversational. "You're welcome. I could have you arrested." "You could try." She walked toward the exit. The officers parted for her like water around a stone. Randall called after her, his authority reasserting itself now that the immediate crisis had passed, his ego demanding that he have the last word. "I'm asking you one more time. Who authorized you to touch my equipment? Who are you?" She stopped at the doorway. She did not turn around. "Ask your general who I am, Colonel." Then she was gone, her footsteps fading into the corridor, leaving behind only the faint smell of solder and the uncomfortable silence of men who had just learned that their invincibility was an illusion. The memory of that day followed Alara Vaughn like a shadow as the C-130 carried her north through the perpetual Arctic night. She sat alone in the cargo bay, surrounded by supply crates and the kind of isolation that came naturally to someone who had spent her entire adult life being right while everyone else was wrong. But Nevada was not the beginning. The beginning was older, buried deeper, like everything else that mattered. 16 years earlier, Pentagon War College, Washington, D.C. The auditorium was designed to hold 300 people. On this particular morning in the autumn of 2008, it held 9 generals, 47 senior officers, and 1 nervous colonel who was about to end his career. Colonel Nathaniel Vaughn stood at the podium, a slim man in his late 40s with prematurely gray hair and the quiet intensity of someone who spent more time listening to signals than talking to people. Behind him, a projection screen displayed the first page of a document that had taken him 3 years to compile. Polymorphic Signal Threat Assessment. Vulnerabilities in Quantum Communication Networks. 1,000 pages. 1,600 footnotes. 700 pages of mathematical proofs, 300 pages of historical precedent, and one conclusion that no one in the room wanted to hear. The committee chairman, General Marks, sat in the front row with the posture of a man who had already made up his mind before arriving. Next to him was Colonel Garrett Thorne, younger then, still lean and hungry, still climbing the ladder of command with the confidence of someone who believed the future belonged to the bold. Nathaniel cleared his throat. His hands trembled slightly as he advanced to the next slide. Gentlemen, I have spent the last decade studying the evolution of signal intelligence. My conclusion is this. Our new quantum communication networks contain a fundamental vulnerability that will be exploited by hostile actors within the next 10 years. The room was silent, but it was not the silence of attention. It was the silence of patience, of men waiting for an eccentric to finish speaking so they could move on to more important matters. Nathaniel continued. Quantum entanglement offers unprecedented security against conventional interception, but it relies on error correction protocols that assume a rational signal environment. A sufficiently sophisticated adversary could inject a polymorphic signal that mimics those protocols while actually functioning as an adaptive attack vector. He paused, gathering courage for the next part. The signal would use the system's own error correction against itself, creating a recursive feedback loop. Communication would collapse, navigation would fail, any system integrated with the quantum network would become compromised. And because the attack would appear to originate from within the system, automated security would be unable to distinguish between malfunction and hostile action. General Marks leaned forward. Colonel Vaughn, are you suggesting that our most advanced communication technology, the system we've spent $12 billion developing, is fundamentally broken? I'm suggesting it's vulnerable, sir, in specific circumstances. What circumstances? High electromagnetic interference, solar activity, geomagnetic storms. Any condition that creates background noise, the error correction protocols have to work harder to filter. Marks glanced at Thorne, who was making no effort to hide his skepticism. And your solution? Marks asked. Nathaniel advanced to the next slide. It showed a schematic of equipment that looked like it belonged in a museum. We maintain analog backup systems, legacy architecture that's isolated from the quantum network, vacuum tubes, mechanical relays, crystal oscillators, systems that are too simple to be compromised by sophisticated signal attacks. The silence broke. It started with a snort from someone in the third row, then a chuckle from the left side of the auditorium. Within seconds, the room was filled with laughter. Colonel Thorne was the one who put it into words. Colonel Vaughn, with all due respect, your solution to a 21st century threat is 1940s technology? What's next, carrier pigeons? More laughter, louder now. Nathaniel's face remained neutral, but his hands gripped the podium. Simplicity is not weakness, Colonel Thorne. A sophisticated attack cannot compromise a system that lacks the complexity to be manipulated. Marks raised his hand and the laughter subsided. Colonel Vaughn, your paranoia is noted. But we live in a modern world. We face modern threats, and we will meet them with modern solutions, not by retreating into Cold War nostalgia. Sir, I'm not suggesting we retreat. I'm suggesting we maintain redundancy. Your report is rejected, Mark said. His voice was not cruel, merely final. The committee votes unanimously against implementation of your recommendations. Nathaniel stood at the podium, the projection screen behind him still showing diagrams of vacuum tubes and copper wire. Obsolete technology for an obsolete way of thinking. In the back row, watching from the public gallery, sat an 18-year-old girl with her father's eyes and her father's quiet intensity. Ilara Vaughn watched the 9 generals vote against her father, one by one. Each vote another nail in a coffin she did not yet know was being built. After the committee adjourned, she found her father in the corridor outside the auditorium. He was standing alone, holding his briefcase, staring at nothing. Dad? He turned, smiled. It was the saddest smile she had ever seen. They'll learn, he said quietly. They'll learn the hard way. And when they do, someone needs to be ready. Someone needs to remember. I'll remember, Ilara said. She did not know then that she was making a promise she would spend the next 20 years keeping. 8 years later, Forward Operating Base Scorpion, Syrian border. The attack came at 03:47 hours on a moonless night in late September. FOB. Scorpion was a temporary facility, little more than prefabricated structures surrounded by concrete barriers and razor wire, dropped into the Syrian desert to support a classified operation that would be forgotten by history within 6 months. It housed 230 personnel, most of them technical specialists and security contractors, all of them believers in the technological superiority that had brought them safely through a dozen other operations in a dozen other forgotten corners of the world. The base commander was Colonel Garrett Thorne, now 48 years old, his chest decorated with the accumulated ribbons of a career spent proving that modern warfare belonged to those who embraced modern technology. The senior technical advisor was Colonel Nathaniel Vaughn, now 62 years old, relegated to installation duties after his theories had been rejected by every committee that mattered. He was there to oversee the deployment of a new sensor package, working in quiet obscurity while younger, more confident officers made the decisions that would determine whether anyone lived or died. 36 hours before the attack, Nathaniel had requested a meeting with Thorne. They met in Thorne's office, a cramped space that smelled of dust and diesel fuel. Nathaniel brought a data tablet displaying signal analysis that showed anomalous patterns in the routine network traffic. "Colonel Thorne, I need you to look at this." Thorne did not look up from the logistics report he was reviewing. "What is it, Nathaniel?" "Someone is probing our quantum communication array, testing response times, mapping vulnerabilities." Now Thorne looked up, his expression hovering between annoyance and concern. "Our security AI would have flagged hostile reconnaissance. The AI doesn't recognize it as hostile because the probe is mimicking our own diagnostic protocols. But the timing patterns are wrong. The sequence is wrong. Someone is preparing an attack." Thorne studied the tablet for perhaps 30 seconds, then handed it back. "Nathaniel, I respect your experience, but our systems are 3 generations beyond what you studied. The AI is learning in real time. If there was a genuine threat, it would know. The AI only knows what it's programmed to recognize." "And you know better?" The question hung in the air between them. Nathaniel chose his next words carefully. "I'm asking you to switch to backup communication protocols for the next 72 hours. Manual systems, hardened against signal interference. That would blind us operationally. It would keep us alive." Thorne stood, a physical gesture meant to end the conversation. "Nathaniel, I appreciate your concern, but I have a mission to run. I can't justify operational paralysis based on pattern recognition and intuition. Focus on your sensor package. Leave command decisions to me." Nathaniel left the office. He did not argue further. He had learned, over the years, that arguing with certainty was like arguing with physics. You could not change it. You could only prepare for its consequences. 36 hours later, the consequences arrived. The high-frequency whine started so quietly that most people did not notice it at first. It existed at the edge of perception, the kind of sound that makes a person wonder if they are imagining it. But Nathaniel heard it immediately, heard it in the temporary quarters where he was reviewing installation schematics, heard it and knew with absolute certainty what it meant. He was running before the alarms started. The base's quantum communication array collapsed in less than 20 seconds. The error correction protocols encountered a signal they recognized as friendly, accepted it, integrated it, and then discovered too late that they had invited a virus into their own bloodstream. The system began chasing itself, each component trying to correct errors that were being generated by the correction process itself, a recursive loop that consumed processing power and bandwidth until nothing was left except static. Communication died first. The carefully maintained connection to headquarters, to orbital assets, to the network of drones circling overhead, all of it vanished in an instant, replaced by white noise. Navigation died second. The GPS receivers, the inertial guidance systems, the backup celestial navigation computers, all of them integrated with the quantum array for precision synchronization, all of them suddenly reporting impossible positions, contradictory data, garbage disguised as truth. The defensive grid died third. The automated systems that were supposed to detect and engage hostile fire. The AI that was supposed to protect the base better than any human could. It locked up, paralyzed by the flood of false signals, unable to distinguish between sensor error and enemy action. In the command center, Colonel Thorne was shouting orders that no one could execute. "Reboot the array! Switch to backup protocols! Get me a connection to CENTCOM!" But there were no backup protocols. Not really. Not ones that had been maintained or tested or taken seriously. The backups were integrated with the same quantum network that was now destroying itself. Rebooting accomplished nothing except wasting time. Outside the wire, in the darkness beyond the perimeter lights, hostile forces that had been waiting for exactly this moment began their advance. Nathaniel reached the communications building and found it filled with panicked technicians stabbing at keyboards that no longer controlled anything. He ignored them. He went directly to a storage locker that held equipment most of these younger men had never seen outside of textbooks. A high-frequency radio, vacuum tube amplifier, manual antenna tuner, crystal oscillator, equipment from another era, another war, another way of thinking. He began connecting components with the speed of someone who had practiced this exact scenario in his mind 1,000 times. Soldering wires, calibrating frequencies, building a lifeline out of obsolete technology while the modern world burned around him. The first mortar round hit the vehicle depot. The explosion shook the building, knocking tools from his hands. He kept working. The second round hit closer, close enough that dust fell from the ceiling and the lights flickered. His hands were steady. He had the radio operational in 4 minutes. He was tuning the antenna when the building's door burst open and a sergeant appeared, wild-eyed and terrified. "Sir, we have to evacuate. The perimeter is breached." "I need 2 more minutes." "We don't have 2 minutes." "Then stay or go. I'm finishing this." The sergeant stayed. Nathaniel achieved signal lock 90 seconds later. It was not much. A narrow band of clear spectrum in an ocean of electromagnetic chaos, but it was enough. He keyed the microphone and began transmitting a digital burst. Not a call for help, not a request for evacuation, something more valuable. He was transmitting a complete capture of the polymorphic signal that was destroying the base. Every frequency, every modulation pattern, every adaptive algorithm. A perfect recording of the enemy's weapon, preserved in the few minutes before that weapon achieved total victory. The final mortar round hit the communications building directly. The blast killed Colonel Nathaniel Vaughn instantly. It also destroyed the high-frequency radio he had just finished using. But the transmission had already been sent, already been received by a satellite relay station 300 miles away, already been encrypted and stored and marked with the highest priority classification. The siege lasted 11 more hours. When it was over, 18 Americans were dead, including the colonel who had spent his final minutes proving that he had been right all along. Colonel Garrett Thorne survived. He was extracted with the other survivors, debriefed, decorated for his conduct under fire, and promoted 6 months later. The official report classified the base's communication failure as catastrophic equipment malfunction exacerbated by hostile electronic warfare. It made no mention of warnings that had been ignored. It made no mention of backup protocols that had been dismissed as obsolete. It made no mention of the name Nathaniel Vaughn except in the casualty list. But the transmission he had sent in his final minutes was received by someone who understood its significance. In Baghdad, Captain Ilara Vaughn received notification of her father's death via official channels. She received his final transmission via unofficial ones. It took her 6 months to decrypt it fully. 6 months of working through his codes and his methodologies and his way of thinking. 6 months of nights spent alone in a small apartment, surrounded by equipment she had bought with her own money, teaching herself her father's language of signals and silence. When she finally understood what he had captured, when she finally saw the complete picture of the attack that had killed him, she submitted her resignation from active duty. She had a different mission now, a more important one. She would finish her father's work. And she would make sure that every arrogant officer, every dismissive committee, every believer in technological invincibility learned the lesson her father had died teaching. She would become what they needed, whether they wanted it or not. Present day, Pentagon, General Marx's office. The general was 71 years old now, his hair white, his face carved with lines that spoke of decisions that kept a man awake at night. He sat behind a desk that held 40 years of accumulated command, and he looked at the woman standing before him with an expression that might have been guilt, or might have been fear, or might have been both. "Dr. Vaughn," he said, "thank you for coming." Ilara said nothing. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back, waiting. Marx cleared his throat. I'm sure you're wondering why I requested this meeting. You're sending me to Station Zero. He blinked. How did you? Because there are only 6 installations with the strategic importance and the vulnerability profile that would require Project Night Widow. 5 of them are currently secure. Station Zero is not. Marks leaned back in his chair. 8 years had not diminished his discomfort around this woman. She made him feel transparent, as if she could see through flesh and bone to the guilt that lived inside. You're correct. Station Zero, Arctic Monitoring Facility. Commander is Colonel Garrett Thorne. He watched her face for a reaction. There was none. I assume you know the name, Mark said quietly. I know it. I didn't assign him there to create this situation. He's been at Station Zero for 3 years. He's done good work. But recent intelligence suggests a coordinated attack on the Arctic Monitoring Network. Same threat actors from Syria. More sophisticated methodology. Timeline? 72 to 96 hours, maybe less. Does Thorne know I'm coming? He knows a technical consultant is being sent. He doesn't know it's you. Why not? Marks hesitated. I thought it would be less complicated. You mean you were afraid he would refuse my assistance? That's one possibility. Alara was quiet for a moment. You were on the committee that rejected my father's report. Yes. You voted against him unanimously. Yes. You called his theories paranoid and obsolete. Yes. She looked at him with those winter sea eyes, and Marks found he could not hold her gaze. And now you want me to save Colonel Thorne from the same mistake you made, the same mistake that killed my father. I want you to save the station, Mark said. Thorne is secondary. Nothing is secondary, General. Syria taught us that. She turned to leave. Dr. Vaughn, she stopped, did not turn. Your father was right, Mark said, about everything. I should have listened. We all should have. Yes, Alara said. You should have. Then she was gone, and Marks was alone with his guilt and his memories and the knowledge that he had sent Nathaniel Vaughn's daughter to save Nathaniel Vaughn's destroyer. The mathematics of justice were cold and clean, and he suspected that Alara Vaughn would solve them with the same precision she brought to everything else. The C-130 began its descent through the Arctic darkness. Below, the ice stretched to the horizon, a frozen void broken only by the faint lights of Station Zero, buried 300 feet beneath the surface. Alara sat in the cargo bay, surrounded by supply crates and silence. She held her father's toolkit on her lap, the worn leather case containing tools that were older than most of the officers she was about to meet. She had done this 12 times before, 12 different installations, 12 different commanders who dismissed her until crisis forced them to listen. 12 different victories that left her feeling more exhausted than triumphant. But this was different. This was Thorne, the man who had ignored her father's warnings, the man who had sent him to install a sensor package instead of letting him prepare for the attack he knew was coming. The man who had survived while her father died proving himself right. She wondered if Thorne had learned anything in the 8 years since Syria. She suspected not. Men like him rarely did. They climbed the ladder of rank and responsibility, accumulating authority that shielded them from the consequences of their certainty. The C-130 touched down on the ice runway with a shudder. The ramp lowered, and Arctic wind flooded into the cargo bay, carrying with it the smell of ice and diesel fuel and isolation. Alara shouldered her duffel bag, picked up her toolkit, and walked down the ramp into the frozen darkness. A figure was waiting for her at the edge of the landing zone. Large, commanding, chest decorated with ribbons that spoke of a successful career built on confidence and conventional thinking. Colonel Garrett Thorne. He did not recognize her. Why would he? He had never looked at her closely enough when she was 18, sitting in the back row of the War College auditorium, watching him laugh at her father. Miss Vaughn, he called over the wind. Welcome to Station Zero. I'm Colonel Thorne. I'll have my XO show you to your quarters and brief you on the facility schedule. Alara walked past him without slowing. Where is Auxiliary Control Station? Panel designation B7. Thorne hurried to catch up, confused by her lack of protocol, her absence of deference. The auxiliary station? That's been powered down for over a decade. Why would you... Where is it? Something in her voice made him stop trying to be polite. Sublevel 3, Section B. But I should tell you, Miss Vaughn, we have very specific protocols here. I run a tight operation, and I expect... But she was already walking away, following the signs that pointed down into the frozen earth, down to the auxiliary station where her father's equipment waited in darkness. Thorne stood on the ice, watching her disappear into the facility, and felt the first small stirring of unease. He shook it off. He was Colonel Garrett Thorne. This was his station, his command, and some civilian consultant from headquarters was not going to disrupt his routine. He would learn to regret that certainty. They all would. The auxiliary control station occupied a forgotten corner of Sublevel 3, buried beneath layers of concrete and ice and institutional neglect. The door had not been opened in so long that the hydraulic mechanism groaned in protest when Alara keyed in the override code her father had given her 15 years ago. A code that should not have worked, that should have been cycled out of the security system generations ago. But her father had built systems that endured. The lights flickered on, revealing a room that existed out of time. While the rest of Station Zero gleamed with holographic displays and quantum processors, this space belonged to another era. Gray metal cabinets lined the walls, each one housing equipment that museums would have cataloged as artifacts. Vacuum tube amplifiers, mechanical relays, analog oscilloscopes with cathode ray tubes that glowed soft green when powered. A web of copper wiring ran across the ceiling like copper veins, connecting components with physical pathways that no software could infiltrate, no AI could compromise. In the center of the room sat the main console, its surface covered with switches and dials and indicators that required human hands to operate, human eyes to interpret, human judgment to understand. Alara set down her toolkit and ran her hand across the console's surface. Dust came away on her fingers, but beneath it, she could feel her father's presence. Could almost see him standing here during the installation, checking connections, calibrating frequencies, building redundancy into a system that everyone else considered obsolete. She opened the main panel and studied the interior. The components were old but sound. Her father had built for durability, for the long silence between maintenance visits, for the possibility that someday someone would need these systems in a moment when modern technology had failed. That someday had arrived. She began the power-up sequence, flipping switches in the specific order her father had taught her, waiting for each subsystem to stabilize before energizing the next. The equipment hummed to life with sounds that were mechanical and honest, sounds that came from physical processes rather than abstract computations. The door opened behind her. A young man stood in the entrance, perhaps 27 years old, wearing the uniform of a specialist first class. His name tag read Keller. He had the nervous energy of someone who was good at his job, but perpetually worried he was not good enough. "Ma'am, that system isn't authorized for activation. I need to ask you to—" "What's your specialty, Specialist Keller?" He blinked at the interruption. "Signals analysis, ma'am. Spectrum monitoring, and then you'll understand what I'm doing here." She continued working, her hands moving through calibration procedures with practiced efficiency. Keller watched, torn between his orders and his curiosity. "Ma'am, I really should report this to Colonel Thorne." "You should. You will. But first, come here." Something in her voice made it impossible to disobey. He approached the console, and she pointed to one of the analog oscilloscopes. A waveform danced across the green screen, complex and irregular. "What do you see?" she asked. Keller studied the pattern. "Background electromagnetic noise, solar activity, normal for this latitude." "Look closer, at the harmonics." He looked. His expression changed as he noticed what she had already identified. Buried in the noise was a pattern, faint but present, a rhythmic variation that should not have existed in natural electromagnetic radiation. "That's not random," he said quietly. "No. Someone is probing your primary quantum array, testing response times, mapping vulnerabilities, has been for approximately 72 hours. The AI would have flagged hostile reconnaissance. Your AI doesn't recognize it as hostile because the probe is using your own diagnostic protocols, mimicking friendly traffic. But the timing is wrong. The modulation is wrong. To anyone who knows what to listen for, it's obvious." Keller straightened. "I need to report this immediately." Report it. Tell Colonel Thorne that the consultant from headquarters has detected anomalous signal patterns consistent with pre-attack reconnaissance. Tell him that I recommend switching to backup communication protocols within the next 48 hours. Will he listen? Alara's smile was cold and small. What do you think, Specialist Keller? He hesitated, then shook his head slowly. He'll want hard evidence, data the AI can confirm. He doesn't trust instinct. Then we'll prepare without his permission. I need components. T3 signal amplifiers, 50 meters of shielded coaxial cable, manual bypass switches, a complete toolkit for the primary communications junction. Can you acquire these without creating an official requisition? Keller understood what she was asking. You want me to circumvent the supply chain. I want you to be ready when the system fails, because it will fail, Specialist, very soon. And when it does, these obsolete systems will be the only thing keeping everyone here alive.
He studied her face, trying to read something in those winter sea eyes, trying to understand who this woman was, and why she spoke with such absolute certainty. Ma'am, I don't even know your name. Your credentials just say Level 7 clearance. My name is Alara Vaughn. She watched his face change as he processed the name, searched his memory, made the connection. Vaughn, as in Colonel Nathaniel Vaughn? The original architect of the Arctic Monitoring Network? My father. The Vaughn protocols are legendary. We study them in signals school. His work on legacy system integration, his theories about polymorphic signal attacks. Keller's voice trailed off as another connection formed. Syria. Forward Operating Base Scorpion. He was killed in the attack. He was killed trying to fix what no one would prevent.
He spent his final minutes building a radio out of spare parts because the modern systems had failed exactly as he predicted they would. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the auxiliary equipment. Colonel Thorne was the commander at FOB Scorpion, Keller said quietly. Yes. Does he know who you are? Not yet, but he will, when it matters. Keller made his decision. I'll get your components, Dr. Vaughn, whatever you need. After he left, Alara continued working alone in the auxiliary station, surrounded by her father's legacy, preparing for a crisis she knew was coming as surely as she knew the sun would rise over the frozen horizon. Except in the Arctic, in winter, the sun did not rise at all. The command center of Station Zero was a study in modern military architecture. Holographic displays floated in midair, showing real-time data from satellites, ground sensors, and the quantum communication array that connected this facility to the global defense network. 28 personnel worked at their stations, each one a specialist in their particular domain, each one confident in the technology that surrounded them. Colonel Garrett Thorne stood in the center of it all, master of his domain, addressing his senior staff in the daily briefing that maintained discipline and focus. Gentlemen, we occupy the most critical monitoring position in the Arctic theater. Every signal that crosses the polar region passes through our arrays. Every potential threat is filtered through our AI. We are not just observers, we are the first line of defense for an entire hemisphere. His officers nodded. They had heard variations of this speech before, but it never grew old. They believed in their mission, believed in their commander, believed in the quantum systems that made their work possible. Our current readiness status is green across all metrics. The recent solar activity has created some minor interference, but our error correction protocols are handling it well. We remain at full operational capability. That was when Alara entered the command center. She moved quietly, without announcement, taking a position near the rear of the room. Several officers noticed her arrival but said nothing, unsure of her status or purpose. Thorne continued his briefing, unaware or unconcerned with the interruption. The Pentagon is sending a technical consultant to review our procedures, some bureaucratic formality. I expect you all to provide whatever information she requests, and then we'll get back to actual work. Colonel Thorne. The voice was quiet, but it cut through his words like a blade through fog. The room went silent. Every head turned. Thorne looked at her with irritation. Yes, Miss Vaughn. Can this wait until after the briefing? Your primary quantum array has 3 critical vulnerabilities that are currently being exploited by hostile reconnaissance. The silence deepened. Then, from somewhere in the room, someone laughed. A nervous, uncertain sound. Others joined in, the laughter spreading like a contagion. Officers releasing tension through humor at the absurdity of this small woman contradicting their commander about systems she had been on station for barely 6 hours. Thorne's face flushed, but he maintained his composure. I'm sorry, Miss Vaughn. Did you just audit my billion-dollar defense grid in, what, a few hours? 4 hours. 3 for the audit, 1 for cross-referencing with threat databases you don't have access to. More laughter now, louder, less nervous. The absurdity of the situation gave them permission to mock. Thorne gestured broadly, playing to his audience. Gentlemen, our expert has thoughts. Please, Miss Vaughn, enlighten us. Ilara walked to the primary tactical display. Her hands moved across the haptic interface with the confidence of someone who had designed similar systems. Security warnings flashed. Unauthorized access. Level 7 breach. What the hell are you doing? Thorne demanded, his amusement vanishing. Demonstrating. The tactical display reconfigured, showing layers of data that the standard interface kept hidden. Signal analysis, frequency spectra, real-time pattern recognition. And there, buried in the noise, the harmonics that Keller had identified in the auxiliary station. Your primary array is currently 3.7 milliseconds out of sync with network standard. This is creating an exploitable harmonic resonance in subspace frequencies. Lieutenant Merrick, the senior communications officer, checked his own console. His expression changed from skepticism to concern. Sir, there is an anomalous resonance. I'm seeing it now. It shouldn't be there. Thorne waved it off. Resonance is within acceptable tolerances, minor fluctuation from the solar activity. For peacetime operations, yes, Ilara said, but you're not in peacetime. You're under active reconnaissance, and when the geomagnetic storm arrives in 47 hours, that harmonic ghost will become an attack vector for polymorphic signal injection. Thorne stepped close to her, using his physical size as a tool of intimidation. At 6'2", he towered over her. His chest full of ribbons represented decades of command authority. His voice dropped to a dangerous register. This is my station, my command, my systems. Are you questioning my competence? Ilara looked up at him without flinching. Her eyes were flat, analytical, devoid of fear or anger or any emotion that he could leverage. I'm stating technical facts, Colonel. Whether you question your own competence is your decision. The room held its breath. Thorne's jaw clenched. You will confine yourself to the auxiliary station. Touch nothing else. Dismissed. Ilara held his gaze for 3 seconds, long enough to make it clear that she was leaving by choice, not by command. Then she turned and walked out, her footsteps echoing in the absolute silence. After the door closed, nervous laughter resumed. Officers shook their heads, exchanged glances that said, "Can you believe this woman?" But Thorne did not laugh. He stared at the tactical display where she had pulled back the curtain on systems he thought he understood, where she had revealed patterns he had never noticed. Get back to work, he said quietly. His men obeyed, but several of them kept glancing at their consoles, looking for the anomalous resonance, seeing it now that it had been pointed out, wondering what else they might have missed. Specialist Keller followed Ilara back to the auxiliary station, carrying the components she had requested. He found her already deep in fabrication work, her hands moving through tasks that seemed impossible. She was building custom hardware, soldering connections, testing circuits, preparing for a crisis that existed only in her certainty. Dr. Vaughn, he said carefully, how did you know about the harmonic ghost? She did not look up from her work. My father predicted that exact vulnerability 14 years ago, in a report presented to a Pentagon committee. What happened to the report? They rejected it unanimously, called his theories paranoid and obsolete, told him that modern systems had evolved beyond such simple attacks. And Syria? Now she paused, set down her soldering iron, looked at him directly. Syria was exactly what he predicted. Polymorphic signal attack timed to geomagnetic interference. The quantum communication array collapsed in 20 seconds. 18 men died because no one would listen to an old man with old ideas. Colonel Thorne was the base commander. Yes, he told my father to focus on his sensor installation and leave command decisions to real commanders. 36 hours later, my father was dead. Keller was quiet, processing this information, understanding now the weight that hung in the air between Alara and Thorn, the history that made every interaction between them a form of combat. Does he know who you are? He will soon enough. The door opened. Colonel Thorn stood in the entrance, his face unreadable. Specialist Keller, you're dismissed. Keller hesitated, glanced at Alara. She nodded slightly. He left, casting one backward look before the door closed. Thorn and Alara stood in the auxiliary station, surrounded by equipment from another era, the ghosts of old wars and old warnings hanging between them. You're Nathaniel Vaughn's daughter, Thorn said, not a question. Yes. The general didn't tell me. The general thought it would be less complicated. He was wrong. Thorn walked slowly around the room, looking at the equipment she was preparing, the components she was integrating, the analog system she was bringing back to life. I was at FOB Scorpion, he said quietly. I know you know that. I know. Your father came to me before the attack, showed me signal analysis, warned me that we were being probed. And you told him he was paranoid. I told him to focus on his installation work. Thorn's voice was rough. I told him to leave command decisions to me. And then the attack came, exactly as he predicted. Yes. And he died trying to jury-rig a radio, trying to call for help that would have been there if anyone had listened. Yes. Thorn turned to face her. I've carried that for 8 years, Dr. Vaughn. I know what I did. I know what it cost. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you learned nothing. You're making the exact same mistake, dismissing warnings, trusting in technological superiority, refusing to prepare for the possibility that your systems might fail. My systems here are generations beyond what we had at Scorpion. And the enemy is generations beyond what they were. They learned from Syria. They refined their techniques. They're coming for you, Colonel. And when they do, your quantum array will betray you just like it betrayed my father. You can't know that. I know it the way my father knew it, the way anyone who actually listens to signals instead of algorithms would know it. But you don't listen. You never have. Thorn's hands clenched. Then why are you here? If you think I'm incompetent, if you think I'm going to get everyone killed, why not just report me and have me removed? Because removal takes time, and the attack will come in less than 48 hours. I'm here to save your station, Colonel Thorn, not for you, for the 27 other people here who don't deserve to die for your arrogance. She turned back to her work, dismissing him as completely as he had dismissed her father. Thorn stood there for a long moment, wrestling with pride and memory and the terrible weight of knowing she was right. Finally, he spoke. What do you need? Permission to prepare backup systems, authority to access primary communications junction, crew support when the crisis begins. If I give you that and the attack doesn't come, my career is over. I'll have undermined confidence in our primary systems based on legacy theory. If you don't give it to me and the attack does come, you'll be dead. Which outcome concerns you more? He had no answer to that. I can't officially endorse your approach, he said finally, but I won't stop you from preparing. Work with Keller. Use whatever resources you need, but quietly. Courage by half measures killed my father, Colonel. I know, but it's what I can offer. He left, and Alara was alone again with the auxiliary systems and the echoes of a conversation that had resolved nothing and changed everything. Over the next 36 hours, Station Zero developed 2 parallel realities. In the official reality, the one that existed in reports and duty logs and command briefings, the facility operated normally. The quantum array functioned at optimal efficiency. The AI monitored threats and found none. Readiness status remained green. Colonel Thorn conducted his daily inspections and pronounced himself satisfied with the station's preparedness. In the unofficial reality, the one that existed in the auxiliary station and the quiet corners where specialists gathered, Alara Vaughn built an ark for a flood no one else believed was coming. Keller became her shadow, her assistant, her translator to the station's crew. He brought her components and helped her fabricate custom hardware. He identified young officers who were curious enough to question the comfortable certainty of their systems, who were willing to learn techniques that had been obsolete before they were born. She taught them how to read analog oscilloscopes, how to interpret waveforms by their texture rather than their data. She showed them how to splice copper wire, how to test connections with a multimeter, how to build circuits without the assistance of software or simulation. "Why are we learning this?" one young lieutenant asked. "We have AI that can design better circuits in microseconds." "Because," Alara said patiently, "when the AI stops working, you need to know how to think without it." They worked in secret, or what passed for secret, in a facility where everything was monitored and recorded. But Thorne had given implicit permission, and that was enough. He did not visit the auxiliary station again, did not ask about her preparations, did not acknowledge in any official capacity that anything was being done differently, but he also quietly ordered his senior staff to, quote, provide Dr. Vaughn with reasonable support for her technical review. It was cowardice and courage intertwined, and Alara recognized it for what it was. He was preparing to take credit if she succeeded and to distance himself if she failed. It was the calculus of command, the mathematics of career survival. She did not care. She had not come here to save Garrett Thorne's career. On the second day, Alara received an encrypted communication from Station 3 in Alaska. Her sister's face appeared on the secure channel, and the resemblance between them was striking. Bryn Vaughn was 3 years younger, her features softer, her manner more diplomatic, but her eyes held the same analytical intensity. "Ilara," Bryn said without preamble, "we're experiencing system anomalies here, microglitches in the quantum array. Nothing the AI considers significant, but you know better." "I know what to listen for. You taught me. It's the same pattern, isn't it? The one from Dad's analysis?" "Yes. You're under reconnaissance, too. Part of a coordinated operation. Multiple targets, simultaneous attacks." Bryn's face was pale. "My commander is Colonel Morrison. He was on the 2008 committee." "With Thorne, I know. They all rejected Dad's report. Now they're all vulnerable to exactly what he predicted." "What do I do?" "I'm building a template solution here. When the attack comes, and it will come, I'll validate the countermeasures. Then I'll transmit the protocols to you. You implement immediately, no matter what Morrison says." "He won't listen, Alara. He's like Thorne, believes completely in the quantum systems." "Then you bypass him. Use your authority as technical officer. Invoke emergency protocols. Do whatever you have to do to keep your station alive." Bryn nodded, but Alara could see the fear in her sister's eyes. Fear not of the coming attack, but of the responsibility, of having to make the same stand their father had made, of potentially being ignored the same way he had been ignored. "Bryn, listen to me. You are not Dad. You don't have to convince anyone. You just have to be ready to act when the systems fail. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Promise me." "I promise." After the call ended, Alara sat alone in the auxiliary station, her hands trembling slightly. It was one thing to risk her own life proving her father's theories. It was another to know that her sister was in the same danger, facing the same institutional arrogance, carrying the same burden of knowledge that no one wanted to hear. She returned to her work with renewed intensity, checking and rechecking every connection, every component, every backup system. Failure was not an option. Not when Bryn's life depended on the template solution Alara was building. Keller found her at 0300 hours, still working, her eyes red from exhaustion and the glow of cathode ray tubes. "Dr. Vaughn, you need to rest. I need to finish this. You won't be any good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." She looked at him, this young specialist who had chosen to believe her when no one else would, and recognized something in his earnest concern. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "You could have reported me to Thorne on the first day, could have treated me like everyone else does, as a paranoid civilian with obsolete ideas." Keller was quiet for a moment. "My father was an immigrant, came to America with nothing, joined the army, spent 30 years proving he belonged. He always told me, the loudest voice in the room is rarely the one worth listening to. The person who knows the truth is usually the one standing quietly in the corner, waiting for everyone else to stop talking." "Your father sounds wise." He died disappointed in me. I was never good enough, never quite met his standards, but I learned to look for the quiet voices. And when you walked into this station and started speaking truth that no one wanted to hear, I recognized it. I'm glad you did, Specialist Keller. It's Wade. Please. She smiled, a rare, genuine expression. Wade, then. And you should call me Alara, at least when we're alone. That feels insubordinate. Good. We're building our own insubordination here. Might as well embrace it. 24 hours before the attack, the Solar Observatory at McMurdo Station in Antarctica issued a warning. A massive coronal mass ejection was heading toward Earth, larger and faster than predicted. Impact estimated in 36 hours. Geomagnetic storm of unprecedented intensity expected. The alert reached Station Zero through standard channels. Lieutenant Merrick brought it to Thorne's attention during the evening briefing. Sir, we're looking at a significant CME. Could create substantial interference with communications and navigation systems. Thorne studied the data. Our error correction protocols can handle it. The AI is already compensating for the increased solar activity. We've weathered storms before. Yes, sir. But Dr. Vaughn requested that I inform you. Dr. Vaughn has made her concerns clear. I appreciate her diligence, but we have systems specifically designed for this scenario. Maintain standard protocols. Monitor the situation. Report any degradation in performance. Yes, sir. After the briefing, Merrick went to the auxiliary station. He found Alara running final tests on the bypass system she had built. He won't switch to backup protocols, Merrick said without preamble. I know. You were right about the harmonic resonance, about the reconnaissance pattern, about everything so far. But he still won't listen. Men like Colonel Thorne don't listen until reality forces them to. We can't change that. We can only be ready when reality arrives. How long? The CME will hit in 36 hours. The attack will come during maximum geomagnetic interference, probably 12 to 18 hours after impact, when our error correction systems are working hardest, when they're most vulnerable to polymorphic injection. That's very specific. It's exactly what my father predicted. The enemy understands timing. They understand how to use natural phenomena as force multipliers. They've been planning this for years. Merrick looked around at the auxiliary equipment, the analog backups, the manual systems that Alara had brought to life. Will this be enough? If the primary systems fail completely? It will be enough to survive. Whether it's enough to save everyone depends on how quickly people listen when the crisis begins, how quickly they transfer authority from their comfortable certainty to uncomfortable truth. Colonel Thorne is a good officer, a good man, but he's afraid of being wrong again. I understand. But his fear doesn't change what's coming. Merrick left and Alara continued her preparations, working through the night, testing and retesting every system, every connection, every possibility. At 0400 hours, she allowed herself a brief rest. She sat at the auxiliary console, her father's toolkit beside her, and pulled out the one personal item she had brought. A photograph, old and worn, showing her father in the basement laboratory where he had first trained her. They were both smiling, both younger, both innocent of the tragedies that would define their lives. I'm ready, Dad, she whispered to the image. Whatever comes, I'm ready. But readiness and confidence were different things, and in the quiet hours before dawn, Alara Vaughn allowed herself to feel the fear she never showed anyone else. Fear that she might fail. Fear that her sister might die because Alara's template solution was imperfect. Fear that she was wrong, that her father had been wrong, that 8 years of preparation might be built on tragedy-fueled paranoia rather than accurate analysis. Then she put the photograph away, locked the fear back into the compartment where she kept all her vulnerabilities, and returned to work. The enemy was coming. The mathematics were clear. The patterns were unmistakable. And Station Zero, buried beneath the Arctic ice, defended by the most advanced technology humanity had ever created, was about to learn the oldest lesson in warfare. Pride goes before destruction, and arrogance before the fall. The coronal mass ejection arrived 18 hours early, as if the universe itself had grown impatient with human arrogance. The aurora that night was unlike anything the Station Zero crew had witnessed in their rotations above the Arctic Circle. The sky became a living thing, curtains of green and violet and crimson that twisted and writhed across the darkness like the northern lights were screaming. The electromagnetic storm washed over the planet's magnetic field with an intensity that made instruments flicker and veterans shake their heads and mutter about once-in-a-lifetime events. In the command center, Lieutenant Merrick watched his displays with growing unease. The quantum communication array was compensating for the interference, exactly as designed, exactly as the engineers had promised it would. Error correction protocols were working overtime, filtering noise, maintaining signal integrity, keeping Station Zero connected to the global defense network. But the compensation itself was the problem. The system was working harder, drawing more power, generating more heat, amplifying signals to overcome the storm's interference. And in that amplification, in that desperate effort to maintain function, the harmonic ghost that Alara had identified was growing stronger. Merrick pulled up the spectrum analysis she had shown them days ago. The resonance that had been barely detectable was now a screaming signature, a vulnerability that anyone with the right equipment could see from 1,000 miles away. He reached for his comm to alert Thorne, then hesitated. What would he say? That the civilian consultant had been right? That the systems they trusted were creating their own weakness? That they should shut down the quantum array in the middle of a geomagnetic storm and switch to backup protocols that had not been used in over a decade? The decision was made for him. At 0347 hours, precisely the same time that Forward Operating Base Scorpion had come under attack 8 years earlier, the high-frequency whine began. It started at the edge of human hearing, a sound that made people pause and tilt their heads and wonder if they were imagining it. But in the auxiliary station, where analog equipment did not imagine anything, where cathode ray tubes showed truth without interpretation, Alara heard it instantly. She was on her feet before the first alarm sounded, her hands already moving through the startup sequence for the emergency systems she had prepared. The auxiliary equipment hummed to full power, decades-old vacuum tubes warming up, mechanical relays clicking into position, copper wire carrying signals that no quantum computer could corrupt. In the command center, 30 seconds behind the auxiliary station's awareness, the crew was just beginning to realize that something was wrong. The alarms started as warnings, soft chimes indicating minor errors, easily corrected anomalies, the kind of glitches that happened during solar storms and were forgotten by the next shift. Then the warnings became alerts, louder, more insistent, demanding attention. Then the alerts became screams. Every display in the command center flashed white simultaneously, a synchronized blindness that lasted 3 full seconds. When the screens returned, they showed gibberish, random characters, corrupted data, the visual representation of a system eating itself. "Report!" Thorne's voice cut through the rising panic. "Sir, we have cascading failures across the quantum array," Merrick called out, his fingers flying across his console, trying to isolate the problem, trying to find something he could fix. Error correction protocols are in conflict with themselves. The system is trying to correct errors that the correction process is creating. Override it. Switch to manual control. "I'm trying, sir. Manual inputs aren't being accepted. The AI has locked us out. It thinks we're the error." Another officer, his voice rising. "Navigation is down. GPS is reporting our position as impossible coordinates. Inertial guidance is contradicting itself. Life support? Throttling, sir. 40% capacity and dropping 1% per minute. Communications? Gone. All channels. Quantum, satellite, radio. Everything is showing carrier signal, but no data. We're transmitting noise to ourselves." The command center, that temple of technological superiority, was descending into chaos. Officers shouted contradictory reports. Displays showed impossible information. The ambient temperature began to rise as environmental controls struggled with degraded commands. Thorne stood in the center of his failing kingdom, and for a moment, just a moment, he was transported back to Syria, to another command center, to another crisis that his technology could not solve. To the moment when he had realized that Nathaniel Vaughn had been right, and that realization had come too late. "Sir!" A young ensign, barely old enough to shave, his voice cracking with terror. "The defense grid is powering up. Automated turrets are coming online." "That's impossible. They only activate under direct threat." The system is interpreting the power fluctuations as an attack signature. It's targeting our own generator housing, targeting life support. Sir, it's targeting us. The displays showed it clearly. 3 automated kinetic defense turrets, each one capable of firing 5,000 rounds per minute of depleted uranium penetrators, were swiveling to aim at the station's critical infrastructure. The AI, in its confused desperation to protect the facility, had decided that the facility itself was the threat. The firing sequence initiated. 60 seconds to impact. Override the defense grid! Thorne's command was nearly a scream. We can't, sir. We're locked out of every system. We have no control. 50 seconds.
Thorne's training, his decades of experience, his carefully cultivated command presence, all of it evaporated in the face of impossible crisis. He began issuing orders, rapid-fire commands that contradicted each other, that addressed symptoms rather than causes, that were the vocal equivalent of a drowning man thrashing at water. Reboot the primary servers. No, isolate them first. Cut power to the quantum processors. Find a hardline connection. Someone get me a goddamn radio that works. 40 seconds. His officers were paralyzed, unable to execute contradictory orders, unable to find purchase in a situation where every learned response was useless. The young ensign was crying. Several others looked ready to follow. They had trained for enemy attacks, for equipment failure, for fire and flood and disaster, but they had never trained for their own systems to turn against them with such totality. 30 seconds. Sir, Merrick said, his voice suddenly quiet in the chaos, where's Dr. Vaughn?
Every head in the room turned, looking for the woman they had dismissed, the consultant they had mocked, the ghost who had tried to warn them and been laughed at for her trouble. I don't know, Thorne said, and then, quieter, God help us. 20 seconds. The voice that cut through the panic was not loud. It did not shout. It did not plead. It simply spoke with the absolute authority of someone who knew exactly what to do and would not tolerate debate. Everyone, shut up, now. Alara Vaughn stood in the entrance to the command center. She was not panicked. She was not afraid. She was the still point in a turning world, the eye of a storm that was about to consume everything around her. Every officer in the room turned to her like drowning men spotting a distant shore. You, she pointed at Keller without looking at him. Junction box 7 beta. Disconnect the primary optical feed. Stand by for my signal. Keller moved instantly, no hesitation, no question. You, she pointed at Merrick. Kill power to the quantum processor core. Physical disconnect, not software shutdown. Do it now. Merrick scrambled to comply, his hands shaking but functional. You, a young lieutenant whose name she did not know. Maintenance locker 3, T3 amplifier, 20 meters of coaxial cable. Run. The lieutenant ran. 15 seconds. She turned to Thorne. Their eyes met. In that moment, 8 years of history hung between them. Syria. Nathaniel Vaughn dying while building a radio. 18 men killed because no one would listen. And now, here, the same story about to repeat unless someone was willing to step aside and let truth speak louder than pride. Colonel Thorne, she said quietly, you had your chance to listen. Now sit down and let me work. He could have refused, could have reasserted his authority, could have died with his dignity intact and taken everyone with him. Instead, he sat down. 10 seconds. Alara moved to the auxiliary panel she had prepared, the one she had connected to the station's vestigial nervous system, the analog pathways that existed beneath the quantum array like copper roots beneath a digital tree. Her hands became a blur, stripping wire, soldering connections, bridging circuits. She was not thinking, she was performing, executing a sequence she had practiced 1,000 times in her mind, that her father had taught her in principle, and that she had perfected in reality. Keller returned with the cable. Merritt confirmed power disconnect. The lieutenant arrived with the amplifier. 5 seconds. She integrated the components into her bypass system with the speed of a surgeon performing a procedure she had invented. This was not standard equipment. This was not taught in any manual. This was the accumulated wisdom of a man who had died, proving he was right, channeled through the hands of his daughter, who refused to let that death be meaningless. The defense grid's targeting solution locked. The turrets elevated to firing position. In 3 seconds, they would shred Station Zero's generator housing, rupture life support, Ignite the ammunition storage and turn this facility into a tomb buried beneath Arctic ice. Alara pressed the manual override switch. It was a physical mechanism, a simple lever that completed a copper circuit and sent an analog signal through pathways that the corrupted AI could not access, could not interpret, could not corrupt. The mechanical click of that switch was the loudest sound in the room. The defense turrets stopped. 1 second before firing, they stopped. The targeting solution degraded. The firing sequence aborted. The weapons returned to neutral position and powered down. Their war against their own home ended by a signal they could not refuse because they could not understand it. The silence that followed was absolute. 28 men stood in the command center, breathing, alive, saved by a woman they had mocked and a technology they had dismissed and a dead man's warning they had ignored until it was nearly too late. Alara did not celebrate, did not acknowledge their stares. She simply continued working, her hands steady, her voice calm. The defense grid is neutralized, but we're still locked down. Life support is at 9 minutes of remaining air at current consumption rate. Communications are completely dead, and there's an enemy ground assault team en route to finish what the attack started. How do you know that? Thorne asked quietly. Because that's what I would do. Polymorphic attack to blind and paralyze, ground team to exploit the chaos. It's a 2-stage operation, and we're in the middle of stage 2. Merrick checked his thermal sensors, one of the few systems still partially functional. His face went pale. She's right, sir. I'm detecting multiple heat signatures. 18 kilometers out, bearing 049er. Moving fast. Looks like armored snow vehicles. We need to contact NORAD, Thorne said. Request orbital strike authorization. With what? Alara asked. The quantum array is poisoned. Conventional radio spectrum is jammed solid. Satellite uplinks are gone. We're completely isolated. Then we're finished. No, we have one option. My father designed a neutrino beam transmission protocol. Deep space communication using modulated neutrino streams. It's incredibly slow, extremely low bandwidth, but it cannot be jammed. That's theoretical. It's never been successfully tested. It was successfully tested, once, at FOB Scorpion, by my father, in the minutes before he died. It worked then. It will work now. She walked to the observation window, the thick triple-paned glass that looked out across the frozen wasteland. The aurora still danced, green fire against black sky. She studied the stars, their positions relative to the ice formations on the horizon, calculating angles and distances and trajectories in her head. "What are you doing?" Keller asked. "Navigation is dead. I can't calculate the transmission vector without position data, so I'm using celestial navigation. Manual positioning based on star charts I memorized before I arrived." "That's impossible," Merrick breathed. "The satellite is in geosynchronous orbit. 35,000 kilometers up. The margin of error for neutrino beam alignment is measured in arc seconds. You'd need computational precision." Alara turned from the window. "My father taught me when I was 16. He called it an obsolete skill, useless in an age of GPS and automated navigation. But he taught me anyway, because he believed that any skill that didn't require power or satellites or technology that could fail was worth preserving." She returned to her auxiliary console and began inputting coordinates, her fingers moving across the mechanical keyboard with absolute certainty. "I'm transmitting a burst communication to NORAD. Situational report, request for kinetic orbital strike, enemy position coordinates. Transmission time will be approximately 90 seconds due to bandwidth limitations." She initiated the sequence. Deep beneath the station, in systems that the main crew had never known existed, exotic particle generators powered up. A beam of neutrinos, invisible and unstoppable, lanced upward through ice and atmosphere and the electromagnetic chaos of the solar storm, aimed at a satellite the size of a briefcase that was currently moving at 3 kilometers per second through its orbital track. The room waited in silence. 90 seconds felt like 90 years. Then, on Alara's console, a message appeared. Single word, green text on black screen. Received. The collective exhale was audible, but Keller was still studying his thermal sensors. "Dr. Vaughn, there's another signal." Inside the station, it's moving through our server infrastructure. Alara's hands froze. Show me. He routed the data to her console. Her face went pale as she analyzed what she was seeing. It's a sleeper code, planted months ago, probably through a routine software update. It's been dormant, waiting for the primary attack to create chaos. Now it's active, hunting for reactor control systems. How long until it finds them? 7 minutes, maybe 8. When it does, it will initiate a coolant dump. Core meltdown follows in approximately 4 minutes. The explosion will vaporize this station and create a radiation zone 200 miles across. Thorne stood. Can you stop it? Not from here. The code is moving through the main network. I'd need to physically trace it, identify which servers it's infected, and destroy them manually. But I have to maintain the communication link for the orbital strike response. I can't do both. The mathematics of the situation were brutally clear. Someone had to hunt the code. Someone had to sacrifice the certainty of Alara's expertise for the possibility that they had learned enough to succeed without her. Keller stepped forward. I'll do it. Ilara looked at him, saw the fear in his eyes, saw the determination that was stronger than the fear. Wade, if you fail, we die anyway. Tell me what to do. She walked him through it, quickly, efficiently, no wasted words. The code would be hiding in servers that were running hotter than normal. He would need to trace it by temperature signatures, by fan noise, by the physical manifestations of digital infection. When he found an infected server, he would need to destroy it completely. Not just disconnect it, destroy it. There's a fire axe in the emergency locker, she said. Use it. Keller ran. Alara returned to her console, monitoring both the outbound communication channel and the thermal tracking that showed enemy forces closing on the station. 16 kilometers now. Moving at 60 kilometers per hour across the ice in vehicles that carried weapons designed to crack open hardened facilities. She began calculating intercept vectors, leading the target, accounting for travel time and reaction time and the cold mathematics of ballistics. A new message appeared on her console, NORAD response. Night Widow authenticated, orbital strike authorized, provide coordinates. She input the data, adding a notation that made Merrick, who was reading over her shoulder, inhale sharply. Dr. Vaughn, that puts the strike point 2.3 kilometers from our position. The shockwave will possibly collapse the ice shelf beneath us, I know. But if we don't eliminate that ground team, they'll breach the facility in 9 minutes. We die either way. At least this way we have a chance. Before she could transmit, a new message appeared from NORAD. Warning, strike point within critical proximity to Station 0. Seismic models indicate 73% probability of ice shelf structural failure. Recommend repositioning strike coordinates minimum 5 kilometers. Every officer in the command center read the warning. Faces went pale. Dr. Vaughn, Merrick said carefully, if the ice shelf collapses, we fall into the ocean, 300 feet down. No one survives. Alara's hands hovered over the keyboard. She could reposition the strike, give them better odds of survival, but the ground team would reach the station. They would breach. They would kill everyone anyway. Thorne, sitting at the back of the room, spoke quietly. Dr. Vaughn, Alara, it's your call. Whatever you decide, we'll live with it. Or die with it. She looked at the faces around her, 28 men who had mocked her, who had laughed at her father's warnings, who now depended entirely on her judgment. Keller's voice came through the intercom, steady despite his exertion. We trust you, Alara. She typed a single-word response to NORAD. Confirmed. She hit send, gambling 28 lives on her calculations, on her father's teachings, on her belief that she was right. NORAD confirmed. 3-minute flight time for the kinetic orbital strike. Deep in the station, Keller was racing through corridors, following the heat signatures that Alara had identified. He found the first infected server in a secondary data center, put his hand on the casing. It was hot, far hotter than it should be. He could hear the cooling fans screaming, working overtime, fighting a battle they could not win. He took the fire axe and swung it into the server with all his strength. Sparks flew. Metal screamed. He swung again, and again, until the server was a ruined mass of shredded circuits and shattered hard drives. The code jumped to another system. He followed, running, tracking the infection like hunting an animal through digital jungle. In the command center, Alara monitored everything. The orbital strike countdown, the ground team's approach, Keller's progress through the station, the reactor's status. All of it converging toward a single point in time where everything would either work or everything would fail. Her hands were steady, her voice was calm, but inside, in the place she never let anyone see, she was terrified. Terrified that she had miscalculated, terrified that Keller would fail, terrified that her sister at Station 3 would face this same crisis without the template solution Alara was still building in real time. Terrified that her father's death would be for nothing because his daughter, despite everything, would not be enough. Keller destroyed the second infected server.
Then the third. The code was adapting, learning, fleeing his pursuit with increasing sophistication. But he was learning too. Learning to think like Alara thought, to listen for the quiet signals beneath the noise, to trust instinct that was built on training he had barely begun to understand. He cornered the code in the backup environmental control server, the last refuge, the final infection point. If he destroyed this server, life support would lose its redundancy. If he did not, everyone would die in nuclear fire. He raised the axe, thought of his father, who had died disappointed in a son who was never quite good enough. Thought of Alara, who had trusted him when no one else would. "This one's for you, Dad," he whispered. The axe fell. Once, twice, 3 times, until the server was scrap metal and silicon dust. Wade Keller stood in the ruined data center, breathing hard, covered in sweat and metal dust. His hands were shaking, his heart was pounding, but he had done it. For the first time since his father's funeral, he felt something he had not felt in years. Not pride, not yet, but something quieter, something his father would have called adequacy. The knowledge that when it mattered most, when lives depended on him, he had not failed. His father had spent 30 years proving he belonged. Wade had done it in 7 minutes, with a fire axe and lessons learned from a woman who understood what it meant to carry a legacy. In the command center, Alara's console showed the reactor status stabilizing. The sleeper code was dead. "Wade got it," she announced. Her voice betrayed nothing, but her hand trembled slightly as she keyed the intercom. "Specialist Keller, return to command center. Well done." The orbital strike reached terminal velocity. The tungsten rod, heated to incandescence by atmospheric friction, became a meteor of human making, a spear thrown by angry gods. It impacted the ice 18 kilometers from Station 0 with the force of a small nuclear weapon. The flash was visible through the observation window, a light so bright that it printed shadows on the back wall of the command center. The sound came seconds later, a deep bass rumble that was felt in bones and teeth and the base of the spine. Then the shockwave hit. The entire station shook. Ceiling panels fell, equipment crashed from tables, men were thrown to the floor. The lights flickered, died, came back on. Emergency power. The groaning of ice was the worst sound. A deep, primordial protest as millions of tons of frozen water shifted and cracked and contemplated collapse. For 10 seconds, no one knew if they would live or die. If the ice shelf would hold, or if Station 0 would fall into the black water beneath the frozen crust. Alara stood perfectly still, her eyes closed, listening to the ice speak its judgment. Then, gradually, the shaking subsided. The groaning quieted. The ice held. She opened her eyes and checked her thermal sensors. Where the ground assault team had been, there was now only a crater of superheated rock and melted ice. Nothing remained. Nothing could remain. The kinetic strike had converted matter into plasma and erased the threat from existence. "Threat eliminated," she said quietly. The command center was silent. 28 men stared at the woman who had just saved them, who had done what their billion-dollar systems could not do, who had proven that sometimes the old ways were the only ways that worked. Colonel Garrett Thorne stood slowly. His uniform was dusty from the shaking. His command presence was gone, stripped away by crisis and revelation. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. "Dr. Vaughn," he said. His voice was hoarse. "I owe you—" "You owe me nothing, Colonel. You owed my father, and he's beyond your debts." The holographic projector in the center of the room flickered to life. Emergency power was sufficient to maintain the connection. The face that appeared was General Marks, and he looked like a man who had been waiting by the communication terminal for hours, praying for a signal that might never come.
Station 0, report. Thorne stepped forward instinctively. This was his command, his responsibility, his report to make. General Marks, this is Colonel Thorne. We encountered a coordinated attack. Polymorphic signal injection combined with Colonel Thorne. Marks's voice was cold. Step aside. Thorne stopped, confused. Dr. Vaughn, your report. Alara moved to the center of the holographic field. She held a data tablet, and with a few commands, she uploaded a complete record of everything that had occurred. Time-stamped logs, audio recordings, video evidence, the complete and unvarnished truth. The data included Thorne's dismissals of her warnings, his refusal to implement backup protocols, his panicked commands during the crisis, and it included Alara's precise responses, her methodical preparation, her successful resolution of every catastrophic failure. Most damning of all, it included audio playback. First, the sound of officers laughing when Alara had warned them about vulnerabilities. Laughing at her methods, at her technology, at her expertise. The laughter was loud and careless and cruel in its dismissiveness. Then, in sharp contrast, the playback continued. Alara's calm voice issuing commands during the crisis, officers obeying without question, the mechanical click of the override switch that had saved them all, the silence of men who realized they had been saved by the woman they had mocked. The contrast was devastating, more effective than any accusation, more powerful than any argument. When the playback ended, General Marks's face was granite. Colonel Thorne, you are relieved of command effective immediately. You will be confined to quarters pending a formal inquiry. Do you understand? Thorne's face had gone pale. General, Do you understand, Colonel? Yes, sir. MPs will escort you. You are dismissed. Two military police officers who had been standing just outside the camera's field of view moved forward. They were professional, neither rough nor gentle, simply executing their orders. Before they took him away, Thorne turned to Alara one final time. Who are you? He asked quietly. Really, Marks answered for him. Colonel Thorne, I will tell you what I should have told you before you arrived at the station. What I should have told you 8 years ago at FOB Scorpion. He paused, letting the weight of history fill the silence. The person who just saved your station and everyone in it is Dr. Alara Vaughn, Night Widow Specialist. She is the daughter of Colonel Nathaniel Vaughn, the man whose warnings you ignored, the man who died at FOB Scorpion while you survived, the man whose theories you called paranoid and obsolete. Thorne's face went white. After Syria, we created Project Night Widow, a single operator program with authority that supersedes field commanders in matters of signals intelligence and network security. Dr. Vaughn is that operator. Her authority in her domain supersedes yours, supersedes mine, supersedes everyone in the chain of command. Marks leaned forward, his face filling the holographic display. She is the ghost of every warning you ignored, Colonel. The price of your arrogance, the consequence of your certainty. When commanders like you laughed at her father, he died proving himself right. When they laughed at her, he gestured at the audio logs, at the evidence of mockery followed by salvation. She killed the laughter, permanently. Learn from it if you can. The MPs led Thorne away. He did not resist, did not speak. He was a broken man, his career ended, his certainty shattered, his understanding of himself and his competence destroyed by irrefutable evidence. The command center remained silent after he left. Alara turned to General Marks. Sir, Station 3 in Alaska was also targeted. My sister, Captain Bryn Vaughn, is the commander. I need to verify her status immediately. Already done, Doctor. Station 3 came under attack simultaneously. Captain Vaughn implemented your template protocol 17 minutes before the primary assault. Her station survived with 0 casualties. She saved 51 lives. The relief that washed over Alara's face was the first genuine emotion the crew had seen from her. For a moment, the ice melted, and they saw not the legend of Night Widow, but a woman who had been terrified for her sister and was now learning she was safe. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me, Doctor. Thank yourself. And thank your father. The Vaughn protocols are being implemented across the entire Arctic network as we speak. Then Marks's expression darkened. But I need to inform you of the cost. 12 stations were hit simultaneously. Station 0 and Station 3 were the only facilities that survived. The other 10 stations, we lost them all. 287 personnel. The number hung in the air like a curse. Ilara's face became stone again. The commanders at those stations, let me guess, they were all on the 2008 committee, or they were protégés of men who were. Yes, they were warned, just like Thorne was warned, just like my father warned them 14 years ago. Yes. And they ignored the warnings because they believed in their technology, in their superiority, in their certainty. Yes. Ilara looked at the faces around her, young officers who had learned a terrible lesson, who had been minutes from death because their leaders had refused to listen to quiet truth. Institutional arrogance, she said quietly, is the most expensive lesson humanity ever learns, and we keep paying the tuition over and over, generation after generation. She turned away from the holographic display. General Marks, I need to complete my documentation here, then move on to Station 3 to debrief my sister. After that, I have 43 other facilities requiring security audits. Understood, Doctor. And Ilara, your father would be proud. I hope so, sir, because I'm very tired of proving him right while everyone else insists on being wrong. The hologram faded. In the days that followed, Station 0 transformed. A new commander arrived, Colonel Patricia Parrish, who had read the Vaughn protocols and understood their significance. Her first act was to request a comprehensive briefing from Ilara. Her second was to authorize the permanent activation of all auxiliary backup systems. The crew's attitude shifted as well. The mockery was gone, replaced by something that looked like reverence but felt like shame. They spoke in quieter voices. They checked their data twice before trusting it. They asked questions instead of assuming answers. Wade Keller became Ilara's shadow and student. She taught him not just the technical skills, but the philosophy behind them. How to listen for quiet signals. How to trust instinct built on knowledge rather than arrogance built on certainty. How to be right without needing everyone to acknowledge it immediately. Dr. Vaughn, he asked one evening as they worked together in the auxiliary station, how do you do it? How do you stay so calm when everyone's dismissing you, when they're laughing at you? She was quiet for a long moment, calibrating an oscilloscope with the precise attention she brought to everything. I'm not calm, Wade. I'm terrified every single time. Terrified that I'll be wrong, terrified that my father was wrong, terrified that someone will die because I failed to convince them to listen. She looked at him, and for once, her guard was completely down. But my father taught me something important. He said, ego is static. It's the loudest signal in the room, and it tells you nothing. You have to filter it out, yours and everyone else's, before you can hear the truth. And the truth is always quiet. So you filter the fear like you filter static. Exactly. The fear is real. The doubt is real. But they're noise. Beneath them, if you listen carefully enough, is the signal, the truth, the thing that's actually happening versus the thing people want to believe is happening. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He was, and he died proving it. That's what makes me so tired, Wade. Not the work, not the travel, not even the mockery. It's knowing that my father was right, that he paid for being right with his life, and that I have to keep proving the same things over and over because people don't learn. She handed him the oscilloscope. But someone has to do it. Someone has to be the quiet voice that tells the truth when everyone else is shouting comfortable lies. My father did it, I do it, and someday, when I'm too old or too tired or too dead, someone else will have to carry it forward. I'll be ready, Keller said. I know you will. On her final day at Station 0, Ilara stood at the observation window, looking out across the endless ice. The aurora had faded, the solar storm had passed. The Arctic had returned to its usual hostility, beautiful and deadly and indifferent to human drama. Colonel Parrish found her there. Dr. Vaughn, I wish you would stay. We could use someone like you permanently. I have 43 other stations requiring audits, and a sister to visit, and a legacy to maintain. The Vaughn protocols are being taught at the War College now. Your father's work is finally getting the recognition it deserved. 14 years too late, but yes, I'm glad. For what it's worth, what you did here, it matters. You saved lives. You changed how we think about these systems. You killed the arrogance that gets people killed. Alara smiled, small and sad. For now, but arrogance regenerates. In 5 years, 10 years, there will be new commanders who didn't live through this, who will trust their new technology and dismiss the old warnings, and someone will have to save them from themselves all over again. Maybe by then the lesson will have stuck. Maybe. I hope so, because I'm very tired of being right. She turned from the window. Take care of Wade Keller, Colonel. He has the instincts, the discipline. He listens to quiet voices. That's rarer than you think. I will. Alara picked up her duffel and her father's toolkit. She walked toward the transport that would carry her away from this place, this victory that felt more like exhaustion than triumph. Behind her, the crew of Station Zero stood at attention. It was not ordered. It was spontaneous. A gesture of respect that she had earned by saving their lives and teaching them humility. She did not acknowledge it, did not salute, simply walked past them, out into the frozen morning, and boarded the C-130 that would carry her to the next station, the next crisis, the next group of people who would need to learn the hard way. 6 months later, at the United States Military War College, General Marks stood before an auditorium of young officers and taught a course that had become mandatory for everyone who would ever command anything. The Night Widow Protocol, the syllabus called it. Marks showed them footage from Station Zero, the attack, the collapse of systems, Alara's methodical response. The audio playback of laughter, followed by salvation. He made them watch it 3 times. We failed Colonel Nathaniel Vaughn, he told them. We laughed at him. We dismissed him. We let him die proving he was right. That failure cost 18 lives at FOB Scorpion. It cost 287 lives across the Arctic network. He paused, letting the numbers sink in. But his daughter, Dr. Alara Vaughn, ensured we finally learned. She created protocols. She trained personnel. She forced us to maintain humility in the face of technological advancement. And because of her, because of the father she honored by finishing his work, thousands of lives have been saved. The cadets listened in silence. The lesson is simple, Marks continued. The quietest voice in the room is often the one most worth hearing. The person with obsolete skills may understand truths that your modern systems cannot process. And certainty, absolute certainty, is the most dangerous weapon you can carry into any crisis. He showed them the final image. Alara standing in the auxiliary station, surrounded by vacuum tubes and copper wire and technology from another era. Technology that had saved them all when the future failed. Learn from this, because if you don't, someone like Dr. Vaughn will have to save you from yourself. And she's tired. We've made her very, very tired by refusing to listen. The course ended, the cadets left, and across the military, slowly, painfully, the culture began to change. But before Alara Vaughn left Station Zero for the last time, before she boarded that C-130 and flew away to the next crisis, she allowed herself one final moment alone in the auxiliary station. She sat at the console her father had built, surrounded by the equipment that had saved 28 lives, and pulled out the worn photograph. Her father smiled at her from across the years, forever frozen in that basement laboratory, forever believing that someone would remember. "We did it, Dad," she whispered. "They learned." Finally, they learned. She touched the photograph, her finger tracing the outline of his face. For 8 years, she had carried his vindication like a weapon, using it to force arrogant commanders to listen. But vindication was cold comfort. It did not bring him back. It did not erase the Syria morning when she had learned he was gone. What it did do, what she was finally allowing herself to feel, was give his death meaning. 18 men had died at FOB Scorpion. 287 had died across the Arctic network. But because of Nathaniel Vaughn's warnings, because of his daughter's refusal to let those warnings be forgotten, thousands more would live. The relay race continued. Her father had run his leg through ridicule and rejection.
through dismissal and death. She had run hers through exhaustion and mockery, through crisis after crisis. And now, sitting in the quiet hum of analog equipment, she finally understood what her father had known all along. The truth was not loud. The truth was not fast. The truth was not concerned with being popular or believed or vindicated in its own time. The truth simply was patient, persistent, inevitable. And someone had to be willing to speak it quietly, again and again, until the world was finally ready to listen. Alara put the photograph away and stood. She picked up her duffel bag and her father's toolkit. 43 stations remained, 43 audits, 43 opportunities to save lives her father's way. She walked out of the auxiliary station and toward the waiting transport, not as the Night Widow, that legend the military had created, but as Alara Vaughn, daughter of Nathaniel, keeper of quiet truths, runner of the relay race. The C-130's engines roared to life. The next station was waiting, the next commander who needed to learn, the next crisis that would prove once again that her father had been right. She boarded the aircraft and took her seat. As the transport lifted off, carrying her away from Station Zero and toward whatever came next, Alara Vaughn allowed herself something she had not permitted in 8 years. Not happiness, not peace, but acceptance. Her father's death had not been meaningless. Her exhaustion served a purpose. Her loneliness was the price of carrying truth through a world that preferred comfortable lies. And she would keep paying that price, keep running her leg of the race until she could run no more. Because the truth was always quiet, but it was always there, waiting for someone brave enough to speak it. And the truth always won, eventually.